Great. Okay. So the H-GAC was able to share their publicity plan, which I thought was really neat because not all of us have the resources to put something like this together. And I'd like to thank the Houston-Galveston Area Council's outreach coordinator, Francis Rodriguez. This has a lot of great information. It puts a structure to the process and can really help you prioritize and focus your resources, because it's a common theme. We're trying to make do with less in a lot of cases. So part of what Francis shared were the two lessons. And the first of those is to know your audience. And this is something over the 5 years of the past plan, they realized that they needed to increase meeting participation to higher levels. And the number one thing was to look at the demographics. So the main demographic groups that you would need to be tracking are pretty well outlined in the 5-year plans, which is great. And looking at those figures, you can figure out the best strategy for how to reach the different populations. If you're an agency who does other regional plans, you might have demographic information available from studies that have been done previously. Maybe you've already incorporated some of that into the 5-year plan this time. One thing that I have noticed is that data can get pretty old at times. So it's good to check, especially if you're using something from a prior plan, to see if there have been any updates. And this next one, I've posted it in the forums already, but I was really excited to see in 2019, the Texas Workforce Investment Council published a regional profile that broke down by county the populations of individuals with disabilities. And it actually even broke it down by disability type. So if you're looking for that kind of information, that's a great resource. And just as a side note for the forums, that's the kind of information that we're hoping to get up there to help you all along the way. So the second lesson is to leverage your stakeholders. And this also goes with what Katie was saying, reaching out personally and talking to city secretaries, chambers of commerce, school districts, other kinds of management districts in the area, and asking them to share the information on their websites, social media, and with their content or with their contacts. And one thing that's really helpful when you're doing something like this is to be able to give them a template, some text, and even an image to use so they can just post it directly. The same kind of stuff that we like to get when we've got to do something like that. It's good to be able to provide. So now, looking at the publicity plan, what I really liked about this is that it takes a step back and says, okay, let's look at our strategy. What's the overall goal of the program that we're having this meeting for? So, and looking also at what is the purpose of the specific meeting, who's your target audience, and what message you need to convey, or messages, and what needs public input. So kind of defining right away. He suggested a minimum of 3 and no more than 5 specific messages or points of feedback. And then I thought this one was really interesting. Consider what action you want the target audiences to take as a result of the meeting. So are you looking for feedback, or is it an educational type thing? So thinking about that when you're putting everything together. And then one of my favorites, and how will you measure the success? Are you going to be looking at attendance, survey responses? How exactly are you looking to do that? And then also considering what's your timeline for success. The next part gets to the practical matters, to look into what are your resources? And of course, number one, what's your available budget? And thinking of that for all of your communication efforts, as well as for the meetings. You want to consider your source of funding, or hopefully sources of funding, and what support staff will be needed. So who on your staff will need to be doing what, who's going to be working the publicity plan, and who needs to be at the meeting. And also, it's good to consider what's on your wish list if you had unlimited resources, because that's the kind of thing that you can always put into a grant application. So the third part of the plan is about the people. What partnerships are available? Looking at community champions, and I know this is kind of something that we've talked about, that Katie mentioned. I don't think we've used it in those words, but those would be the outspoken members of the public who you could draw in as stakeholders. And the tricky part when you have to replace a stakeholder in that situation is finding a good representative. And part of that is just reaching out into the public and seeing what you can do. And part of this is also thinking about what community events do you need to attend? Where do you need to have your face and represent your organization? Of course, this is a challenge these days, but it's always good to look for ways where that can happen. And again, this is another place to consider what support staff will be needed. And social media is a big thing. What social media platforms or websites can be used to promote the meetings? So the first part of promoting the meetings would be the notifications. These are some of the things they recommend. A letter from the director to elected officials, stakeholders, and other interested parties. It's really nice to get that higher level acknowledgement of the importance of something. A letter from the director, I hear from my director, I perk up my ears. There's also postcard mailings to business lists and residents. That's great, especially if you do have some kind of targeted mailing list, unless you've got a better budget. There's also the agency website project page posting. And this is a little plug. Hopefully your agency has a project page. Also the agency main website calendar. Hopefully your website has a calendar. If not, these are things to definitely consider in the future. You've got your agency newsletters. And this is, when I say this isn't just limited to the planning side of your agency. If as a lead agency, you cover other things as well, put the notifications in there, because transportation crosses across all different aspects of our lives. You can also send blasts to your email list. And one thing I've got to say, H-GAC does a great job. They send me a calendar invitation via email for all of their meetings. And that's simple enough for them to put together, but bam, it is on my calendar. I know when those meetings are. That's a huge help, and just a very simple thing to do. So the next step, social media, as we've been talking about. Not everyone has a social media presence. It's definitely something worth looking into for your agencies. It can be free or very low cost. One thing to remember when you are looking at social media is to tag your partners. That's kind of handled differently on different platforms. The first in H-GAC's list was Facebook posts made by the lead agency. So if the lead agency has its own account, there are also options for Facebook paid advertising, Facebook notes, and Facebook event invites. That's another way to kind of get something on somebody's calendar. Twitter is another option. You can post from your agency's accounts, tag your partners, they can retweet it, and there is also paid advertising on Twitter as well. One thing to definitely consider are doing video posts for social media. Videos are super popular right now, and it can be something short and simple. They don't have to be anything fancy. I looked, there's some great guides online for just how to shoot a good looking video with somebody's cell phone. And that would be pretty exciting to see, I think. So considering distributing the information to the stakeholders, where to send the meeting flyers. And again, this would be everything from chambers of commerce, having postings at libraries, or, at this point, it would be getting it on the websites for these places. Schools, any kind of religious center, community centers, local municipalities, nonprofits, and you can expand potentially beyond the demographics of the plan, neighborhood associations, and if there are other stakeholder groups that are present in your area. So the next part of this would be talking about media strategies. And these can be kind of old school, talking about your letters to the editor and op-ed, legal notices, news releases, but there are also some options like if there's a blog, getting some featured articles or articles in trade and business publications. There's also an opportunity for press conferences. Television interviews and radio interviews are fantastic because you can reach a nice cross-section of the population. And you can always just distribute a PSA to the local radio stations. Just as a side, when I was doing the 5310 public involvement meetings, we sent our PSAs out, and I actually got calls to do interviews for the radio, and that had an impact on the attendance for those areas. So that was pretty exciting. So the next thing to consider are other organizations' meetings and briefings. And you've got the standard commissioners court and city councils, just announcing the meetings at these other organizations' meetings and making sure that the announcements are at the partners' meetings. And this could be anything from you showing up to give a brief presentation to just making sure it's on their agenda to mention it. Don't forget about internal communication too, especially for some of the larger agencies. If there's any kind of an intranet, also just simply posting a flyer in the common areas. Obviously that worked better when we were all in the office, but having that be included in maybe the staff email to have mentions of things like that. Also looking at other committees that are part of your agency, making sure that non-transportation committees are included as well, and that there's an ongoing presentation for your quarterly staff and department meetings to cover what's going on. And then there's a whole grab bag of other options. The utility bill, of course, is a popular and longstanding one. There are other websites that help organize events. One of them would be Eventbrite. There are also community calendars, a lot of like community newspapers and whatnot. Try to keep an ongoing calendar. These days you could post links to your meetings. Posters and transit vehicles, that's always a big one. Pulling together focus groups, like Katie said. You can also do different kinds of polls. And one of the things they had on their list was billboards, which I thought was great. I don't know how accessible that would be in some areas, but the idea of a planning meeting or a planning effort being up on a billboard, I thought that would be really fun. So of course, you put together what you want out of it, who you're going to reach, how you're going to reach them. And now the question is, what are you going to use to reach them with? So here's putting together your content and your graphics. You're going to want the basic flyer, of course. And one thing on the H-GAC recommendations, which I thought was pretty smart, would be a fact sheet about the process and its impact. So a lot of people might not necessarily understand what it means to participate in a meeting or what kind of impact they would have if they're involved. Also, online surveys during the process while you're putting the plan together and in the continuation years to keep in touch with folks. And this can also be a great way to get email addresses to send out messages later, notifications about meetings and general updates. When meetings in person are a thing again, to have a brochure or a place card that you can leave at the seats for the people who are attending the meeting. You can pull all of this together in a folder and even put sort of an introductory letter for the communications kit. There's a copy of the publicity plan that is on the forum. So I'm going to push it every time I get a chance. So you go to regionalserviceplanning.org, and that's the banner image right there. And if you click on the button that says forum, it'll take you to the forums. And I've also included a direct link to it right there. And like everything else, this will be put